The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network.
So, Adam, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is great. This is I was saying just before we got on, this is one of those interesting conversations for me because I get to actually have a conversation with somebody over video that I've been speaking to kind of back and forth over Twitter for the last year or so, and so this is great. I'm excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. It's one of those things. It's become more and more frequent. I've had actual friendships formed through Twitter, so I know how you feel.
It's awesome. It's very cool. So, for those of you who aren't following Adam on Twitter as I am, maybe
which is understandable,
but well, give them a reason to follow you. Tell us a little bit about you.
Oh well, as you may know, I'm Adam Lance Garcia. I'm by day a producer at Conde Nast, producing videos mostly celebrity based. I've done a lot of Star Wars stuff across my career, including each and every Star Wars starfighter, as well as shooting some videos at Galaxy's Edge when it was open back when I worked at Yahoo Entertainment. That is my day job. It is a very cool day job. I basically get to be a nerd professionally. I never thought I would ever be able to do that. And by night, I'm an author. I've written several novels, all mostly for the Green Lama, which is a licensed superhero from the 1940s. Mm-hmm. I've also produced several short stories, original and licensed across my career, and I produce audio dramas in my spare time. That is sort of the long and short of it. And if you do follow me on Twitter, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I might be the one who does "We Are One Day Closer" to X Star Wars thing for some reason. And I keep on doing it, and it's to the point that my phone just automatically fills it in. So that's why you should follow me on Twitter, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's funny. By the time this launches, I see today. Actually, today when we were, I was checking Twitter because I'd like to keep up with the people that I'm going to talk to. I saw that you've switched gears a little bit. You're looking toward the upcoming series coming from the New Republic or the High Republic series.
I wouldn't say I. No. It's funny
because we still have a couple days till Mandalorian.
No, I still have the Mandalorian going. That's because it's literally the first thing I do. I get my phone, I open Twitter, I type "We Are One Day Closer to the second season of The Mandalorian," and then the number count. Literally the first thing I do in the morning, and when I try to explain it to my girlfriend, she's like, "What?" But I also I know Cavan Scott fairly well, so I'm so excited that he's doing the High Republic. I love the idea of the High Republic. I can't wait to read it. I'm a huge Legends fan. I collected all the novels over the course of my life, and the fact that we're getting more of a sort of ongoing narrative in Star Wars in this unexplored area in novel form is something that's very exciting to me. It speaks to my fandom.
Yeah, it's a fun. I've said this so many times. It's really an amazing time to be a Star Wars fan. I look at people like my kids who are 8 and 11 years old who are getting new Star Wars stuff all the time. And,
oh yeah.
When I was a kid, it was like 3 years between films, and
yeah,
it's been such a long time. So maybe tell me a little bit about your experience growing up. How did you get introduced to Star Wars? What's the Star Wars connection for you?
So I'm sort of the later generation. So I was born. I'm going to age myself. I was born in 1983. So it was after the films kind of came out. My father or my parents just had it on VHS, and I don't remember watching Star Wars for the first time. It's sort of always been a part of my life. I think the first one I saw was Return of the Jedi. I remember falling asleep watching Star Wars: A New Hope at my friend's birthday party, but bear in mind that was like the billionth time I had seen it, so that's why I fell asleep watching it.
Right.
at some point I picked up the Jedi Prince novels, the Glove of Darth Vader, because it was like a post Star Wars, a post Return of the Jedi storyline. I'm like, oh, this new Adventures of Luke, and I really got excited. That was sort of my gateway drug in a lot of ways, where I just dove very deep into collecting novels. My cousin was a big Star Wars fan. He's like, oh, you should read the Thrawn trilogy. I read the Thrawn trilogy, and then it was basically just collecting every novel because I really loved seeing the next chapter. I love the stories that are after the heroes win, and that was a big part of it. And then I remember I remember falling to my knees screaming when the trailer for the special editions came out in theaters. I didn't know, like, there was no internet, so we didn't know. I just all of a sudden it's like the Star Wars thing, like, oh my god, Star Wars, and then it's like, it's going to be in theaters, and it blew my mind. And then there was prequels, and I loved them at the time. I've said very frequently that I spent 16 years being called a prequel defender and George Lucas apologist. So it's always weird when someone calls me a Disney shill for not a real fan. I'm like, I just make up your mind at this point. I feel like I've so I it's funny. It's like Star Wars has just been ever present, and it's been a very much a guidepost. Like it's insane again that like my job has been so Star Wars centric. I remember when I first started working at Conde Nast, specifically at Wired, they wanted to do each and every lightsaber video or whatever leading up to episode 9. And they asked, and eventually like, if it comes through, you should fly out to Lucasfilm. And I was like, that was inside. I was freaking out. Outside, I was just like, yes, that sounds like a very good idea. I should go to Lucasfilm. And it's really just, I'm a writer because I really want to write a Star Wars novel one day. I went into film. I studied film because I love Star Wars. When I got the chance to meet George Lucas right around the time Revenge of the Sith was coming out, and I got to tell him, like, you're the reason why I'm here, which is not something I thought I'd ever say to him. I went to the very first celebration when I was 16. My parents were like, well, your grades are good enough, so you can go out to the first celebration. Star Wars is it's a huge part of my life, which is weird if you look around my apartment or just outside. If you talk to me like normally, you think all I talk about is Doctor Who, but like Star Wars is so important to me. It's
always interesting to me to hear stories about or to hear how Star Wars has impacted people's career choices, right? I think, initially you think, and maybe it's because of the people that I end up hanging out with and speaking to in social media, but you think, oh, well, they're going to become an astronaut or something. And there are a lot of people who've done that. But there's so many people that have been inspired to get engaged in entertainment in one form or another. You mentioned just sort of like in passing, I get to tell George Lucas, you have to tell me that story of meeting George Lucas.
Yeah, that's so it was senior year of college. I was studying at NYU. I was a film major there, and it was literally the second semester of my senior year, and they were coming out with the special edition of THX 1138. It was around the time, just a couple of months before Revenge of the Sith was coming out, and I was working at the video TV library within NYU, and that was also part of the job was taking care of like events in classrooms across the Tisch, which is the building we were in, the school that we were in. And there was a rumor floating around that Lucas was going to show up. And I went to my boss, who was a huge Star Wars fan as well. And probably the reason I got the job because we just geeked out about Star Wars. Her and her husband, I'm like, is it true that Lucas is coming? And she's like, I can't say anything. I cannot say anything. Okay, so I go downstairs. I go to another one of my supervisors. I'm like, is it true? Is Lucas coming? He says, if I was you, I would be at this door at this time. Can't say why. Can't tell. But if I was someone like yourself, I would go to this room at this time for some reason. That was also the first time. That was also coincidentally starting at the same time as my animation course I was going to be taking that time. So being the nerd that I was stuck with a conundrum. I get to meet George Lucas, or I get to have to skip class, and which means I have to skip class. And my grades are very important to me, so I can't skip class, especially the first class. So I might have to go not meet George Lucas. So what do? I call my mom, because again, a huge nerd, and I'm like, Mom, this is my situation. What do I do? And my mom's like, she's like worried that like there's a reason I'm calling during the middle of school. Right. She's like, what's up? And I'm like, Mom, like, exactly. And I'm like, Mom, what do I do? She's like, Adam, what the F, expletive deleted, go meet George Lucas. So I went and I met George Lucas, and I got a signed copy of THX 1138, which was in part due because someone there whose name was also Adam had it on him, and I just picked it up. I found him, like, oh, here it is, and he was very kind and he gave it to me. But the funniest part was I sat next to this guy, and I'm like chatting with him for a while. He's asking me how I got to school, et cetera, and then I'm just like, George Lucas, like, leave me alone, old man. Turns out it's Walter Murch. So it was a really weird day, and and the cool thing was I got to say to Lucas, like, not only like this, you're the reason I'm here, but my dad raised me on movie serials, like the old school serials, and one of his favorites, if not his favorite, is Commando Cody. And there's Commander Cody, and I'm like, I got to say, like, I get it. So that was a cool little thing. That's how I met George Lucas.
That's amazing. Yeah, and was he? I imagine he was fairly, when he was in an event like that, he was probably a little bit frazzled, as he always is. But it's always good when you meet your heroes and they don't disappoint you. And it sounds like he didn't disappoint you.
He didn't disappoint. He was a lot more laid back because it was a smaller event.
Right.
But what I think was most elucidating about him was he talked about THX 1138, and he talked about what the thinking behind American Zoetrope was, and what they were trying to do back in the time about fighting the American film studio system. And he's like, and in doing so, I became the American studio system, and you're just like, you're the film studio system. And it's like, I thought that was a really, really cool look in sort of self-awareness, like this guy he's aware of how much he dramatically changed things, and that was very refreshing. And he was very nice. I mean, I had maybe a couple of seconds with him personally, but it's one of those things where I can sit down like, hey, that happened.
Yeah.
So
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's great. Now it's that was an interesting time as well. It's interesting when you talk about his the studio situation, and somebody who studies film and studies entertainment. I'd love your thoughts on sort of a mindset that I've kind of started to recognize, and that is, the original trilogy was created by George Lucas as the most sort of independent thing ever made. In fact, it's one of my guests recently was saying this is the last time we'll ever see an independent blockbuster created that way, because that won't happen again. And then the prequels, he almost went to the other extreme, right, where he took nobody's advice. Nobody was going to impact. During American Zoetrope, of course, he had all these great legendary filmmakers who were all up and comers at the time. And imagine making all those minds in the room looking at each other's I got this crazy film idea. Oh, really?
Yeah.
And they become classics. And then, of course, you have the sequels, which are, I know, I think I have an idea of your opinion on them, and we'll talk about them a little bit.
Sure.
But those are made by in a time, and I won't necessarily say made by, but made in a time of films that are assessed and analyzed and projected for ROI.
Yeah.
I don't want to say first, but I mean, the reality is, Disney made a gigantic investment in Star Wars, so they're going to make money on Star Wars. They're not going to take that giant risks. But how do you see that as kind of a three different tones to the trilogies? And
it's interesting. I would say that the original trilogy is a rare. In fact, both the prequel and the original trilogies are essentially independent films. Like, they're self-financed by Lucas. What I think is interesting about A New Hope, let's start there, is that so much of that film is completely reshaped in edit. And it's, you look at the the Star Wars, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, and what eventually became A New Hope, there's like names that are the same, their ideas are the same, but I think Lucas, to your point, took a lot of input and was able to change the story, and that was true for in a lot of ways for the entire original trilogy. You look at how much Irvin Kershner changed the narrative of Empire. And I think it's also important to remember that like a lot of the original trilogy wasn't planned out. And that's evidenced by Lee Brackett's original script and what eventually happened in the second draft that Lucas rewrote, and how Kershner approached things. And then it starts getting squirrely around Return of the Jedi, because Return of the Jedi, Richard Marquand, I can never pronounce his last name, Marquand. Yeah. He was hired on with the expectation of being sort of like Kershner, but because Kershner had so much, there was the amount of a budget, and there's a lot of concerns. Lucas had a much firmer hand on Return of the Jedi.
Right.
And also, you didn't have Gary Kurtz there to sort of say, like, try something else. Don't do that.
Yeah, I think Kurtz, definitely played a bigger role than people recognize, I think.
It totally. And he also didn't have Marshall Lucas to work on the editing. I think what happened with Return of the Jedi is that Lucas really, there's a lot. He was sort of, I want to be done with this series. And also, there's a lot going around it. It's still an independent film, but I think he started putting more of his own stamp on it. Yeah, I totally, like, this all goes to say, like, read J.W. Rinsler's making of Star Wars and Empire and Return of the Jedi. So much of, I think, what was so elucidating about those books, and why I recommend them to any Star Wars fan, is that so many misconceptions that we have about Star Wars comes from the mythologizing of the production of those films, and later on the expanded universe and sort of the lore that sort of came out of like the Western systems. A lot of the things that we think of like are true for like the Akbar's backstory is a good one, like, and or what a dreadnought is, or just how an X-Wing works, all comes from the West End games, comes from the expanded media, and also a lot of the way that we think about how these films were produced comes from like the documentaries and the narrative that Lucas and the fans created around it. So definitely recommend reading those books, because you just like, oh, they had no idea what they were doing. They were just they lucked out. One of my favorite, not to go up, but one of my favorite quotes is from Ralph McQuarrie, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but essentially he was saying, none of this stuff is going to look good on screen. It looks cool in this, but in Star Wars, there's so much of Star Wars that frankly kind of lucked out and looked great and became classic and shouldn't work, but man, it works so well. So I think that's related to where you were saying about the totally. A lot of it's luck. And to your point about the prequel trilogy, I think Lucas tried very hard to make the movie that he wanted to make. My relationship to the prequels has evolved over time. But again, I think it's good to look at them as independent films. The reason why he made those films was partially so he can keep the company afloat. Because if he could make those movies, they would make money, they would infuse Lucasfilm. That's an important thing to remember. I think Phantom Menace is the most unadulterated version of what Lucas wants to do as a storyteller. And I think the remaining sequels are a bit more of him trying to please the fans, for better or for worse. I loved Return of the Phantom Menace. I loved Attack of the Clones, and I thought Revenge of the Sith was the best Star Wars ever made. My feelings to those have changed over time. I think Phantom Menace has improved in my mind. Attack of the Clones has weakened, and Revenge of the Sith has weakened. Partially because of that point of Phantom Menace is Lucas's vision. It is 110%, and that's one of those things where a film that I don't particularly love, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice. I don't love that movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I can appreciate it as Zack Snyder's vision for these characters, and I think that's similar capacity, I can appreciate Phantom Menace as Lucas's vision. So I think those 6 films are very much independent films in a way that we don't really have today.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point too about the fact that these films have. If you look at them as an independent film and you look at them as George's vision, and this is why I love doing the show every week, because I get a different perspective, because I haven't thought of Phantom Menace that way, but when you do, and you think about, if you just take a moment and connect it to the Starkiller draft and that sort of thing, like there's a reason why some of the ships and the locations feel more Flash Gordon-y, right? He's
totally
creating that world, and he's telling sort of that backstory. And it's I say to me, the reason the prequels have evolved, I love Ken Knapsack's phrase, a reformed prequelist, because I'm the same. I mean, I walked out of the New York City premiere of Phantom Menace with, a bunch of New York celebrities, and nobody said anything. It was a very strange kind of, what did I see? Nobody wants to hurt their own career and go on record saying that movie was good or bad. But it was a very strange experience, and it took me years and years to finally come to that admission that I really now, not admission, but the movie itself has changed to me, so that I like Phantom Menace a lot more than I did before. And without Phantom Menace, you don't get that big world building, and without the prequels, you don't get that whole Clone Wars era, and you get this giant tapestry of story that we're getting today. I joking around, I made a meme that put some pictures of all the Star Wars films together, and it says has anybody here watched the Mandalorian prequels? And because this whole story is now built to this world that, and I'd love your thoughts on this, because to me, Empire Strikes Back is the most important Star Wars movie, not because of the story, but because it cracked the door open on so much more.
I agree with that.
And I think now that we have more story, that also then kind of leads to, in a way, more ownership. You said you were a Legends and EU fan. How did you feel about that Disney decision to put it in its own bucket? And one of the things I love, when Kevin J. Anderson was on my show a couple of weeks ago, Kevin said, he's honored that they've kept it. They could have put all that stuff out of print and just say forget it. But it's
also, it's really cool that I love that, like, you got talking to Kevin J. Anderson, so that's awesome. But go on.
He was amazing. So how did you respond to that? And did you, because there's been visceral reaction, and there's been kind of passive reaction. And where did you come down?
I was upset at the beginning. I was like, oh man, everything I did meant for nothing. But I'm also like, how are they going to make a movie without Chewbacca? So it was a combination of, I was bummed, but also as a storyteller, I kind of understood it, because, how do you explain that? So in the 30 years since you last saw Return of the Jedi, they had three. Han had 3 kids. 2 are dead. 1 turned evil. Also, there was one named Anakin, and he survived for a little while after Chewbacca threw him on the Falcon when a moon landed on him. Also, for some reason, there's a lot of bugs in this, so it made sense. And I think, I like that my head canon at this point is all of Legends, all the stuff that we read is the stories Rey and Finn grew up hearing. So I like to pretend that, like, Rey heard stories of Jason Solo, who became Darth Caedus, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh no, she heard about Ben becoming Kylo Ren, but the game of telephone made it Jason Solo. And then, maybe there's a story hundreds of years later, like, where there's this Force dyad, and they say, like, well, it's Jason and Jaina. It's like, oh, but no, it's Rey and Kylo. You could find the ways of sort of bending over backwards to be like, these are in canon, the legends that people grew up hearing about, because there's enough like of an overlap. Like, how does Thrawn exist in the Clone Wars era, but also he's in the EU era? Like, well, they said, oh, this is great admiral who helped the Imperial Remnant. Like, oh well, that there was Thrawn, so that's my headcanon. So I was bummed, but I also
that's a great way to look at it.
I was talking with someone on Twitter today. It's they were really bummed that Sword of the Jedi never happened. I'm still kind of bummed that Sword of the Jedi never happened too. But at the same time, it's like, isn't it kind of weird that both Legends and canon now end with a Skywalker, a female Skywalker, as the lone Jedi? It's kind of weird. But I think, so I was upset, but I've really come to enjoy a lot of the new canon stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm excited about High Republic, and I enjoy most of the I love most of the sequels, and I love the characters. So I think, while I was bummed at the beginning, I understand from a storytelling perspective that it makes sense to have the doors open, that you can, and they can bring things in. Like, I think the biggest thing is, like, look at The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is essentially an EU novel, like, come to life. There's vibroblades. There are vibroblades on TV, and that's insane.
Yes. Yeah, it's I think that's one of the great things too is I mean, the fact that Thrawn came into Rebels and came back, and I think it's so important to have Filoni as this sort of key storyteller, because I've said this before as well. When you watch the Gallery series, I always felt like Filoni was like the nerd at the table. You had these big Hollywood filmmakers and these giant names in the industry right now, and Filoni's there like, well, actually, the length of the lightsaber was blah blah. So he's like, he's got that knowledge that it's the canon versus Legends has created this opportunity, I think, to also in a positive way tip the hat and pay off people like you and I who've gone through and been there all the time, and throw a little bone, throw the Maul was sort of the first example. Here's your double-bladed lightsaber. Remember that from the comic books? Here we are. Now we have it.
Yeah.
And so I love that. Now, you said you love a lot of the sequels. How do you? One question that sort of a double question and a fun conversation is two things. As we move to what is sold as the end of the Skywalker saga, what makes something Star Wars to you versus just a great, I mean, Dune is great science fiction, but it's not Star Wars. So what will stories need to continue to be Star Wars in this new era?
I mean, I think the first thing is a sense of hope. I think that's something that I hope in the darkest times, even if it's like the story doesn't feel that light or fluffy when you first see it. Look at Empire Strikes Back, you look at Revenge of the Sith, you look at The Last Jedi. It's like the idea that there is things that are terrible and we need to have hope despite it. I think what makes Star Wars is, for me, is understanding that it's a fantasy set in space, that it's dirty and lived in, that sort of like we're touching on it in some capacity. Like, the idea about Star Wars is like why I love it, and the sort of franchises that I enjoy the most are not necessarily things that are chronological, that like have a beginning, middle, and end, or not or let's say like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I have a weird love-hate relationship with at this point. It's it begins here, it continues to there, and it keeps on going forward. What I like about Star Wars is that it starts here and it can go in any direction. It can go anywhere. Like, I think of The Mandalorian's an example of that, where it's like we're now telling the story during the Skywalker saga. It has nothing to do with the Skywalker saga. The High Republic is going to be something beyond that, something we can keep on moving, but we can keep on moving back and back and back and back. There's so many ways that you can tell a story within this universe. What makes a Star Wars a story is it can be any genre. It can be any kind of story, as long as it looks and feels like a Star Wars story, as long as science doesn't matter, as long and more the feel of it matters. Right. Is the thing is, like, what Lucas and Spielberg did in Indiana Jones, the same thing that Lucas did in Star Wars, is that they didn't want they wanted to make movies that felt like the movie serials they grew up watching.
Right.
And rather than make a movie that pays homage, like let's say like you can probably find them, like a Sky Captain of the Worlds of Tomorrow is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. Sky Captain of the Worlds of Tomorrow is a movie that is meant to evoke a very specific movie serial from back in the day. Like it looks, it feels, it sounds like a movie serial. But the problem is with that movie is, despite some the storytelling and everything, is that it leans so heavily into a pastiche. It goes from pastiche to sort of parody and loses its homage. It doesn't speak to a modern audience. And I think what Star Wars was, what Indiana Jones was, is what does it feel like to watch a Star Wars, watch a movie serial as a kid? And that's what they created. And I think, one thing that I hope a lot of future writers and creators, that they don't go in and say, how do I make a Star Wars film? Like, how do I make this film that says Star Wars? I think there's some of my issues with some of the recent stuff. It's like to name, to speak to my issues with Rise of Skywalker. It's like, it's a movie that doesn't have much to say about Star Wars. It is a Star Wars movie that does Star Wars things about Star Wars and Star Wars and Star Wars. I think what makes reasons why I think The Last Jedi works, why I even think Rogue One works, why I think for The Force Awakens to a different degree works as well, is that there's larger ideas on top of it. And I think that moving forward, what I would want to see is someone's like, what, I really want to tell a murder mystery. I want to tell a murder mystery set in Star Wars. And how do you take that genre and make it feel like Star Wars? What are you saying with this universe? What can you do with the Star Wars universe that says something about where we are now? What can you do in this galaxy that says something larger about the human condition, about society? Because that's what Star Wars was,
Right.
For all the points that I made earlier about invoking the feel of a serial, Lucas wanted to direct Apocalypse Now, and he couldn't, so he made Star Wars.
Yep.
Star Wars is an anti-Vietnam War treatise. The prequels was an anti-Iraq War treatise. That's what he made back in and I think that's what needs to appear in these films. No matter what it is, no matter when it takes place, it needs to say something. I think that answers your question.
No. I think that's a really important point. I think people forget about that, and I think so. Two things. One, I think you're right. I think The Mandalorian. I think we all thought it was going to be a Western type of story, right? Or bounty hunter, dusty streets, clicking boots, that whole thing. And by the end of the first episode, it became a story about an independent person having to take on parenthood. Holy cow, that's a very different story than we expected. Of course, there's all the other cool Star Wars-y things happening around it, but at the core, it's. And I just did the rewatch as I prepared for to watch.
Yeah, I have to finish my rewatch.
I did 7 and 8 last night with my kids, and holy cow! Watching it again months later, it really hit me differently. And what's interesting is it's a very different story than we expected, but it's saying something, right? It's making a comment. But you brought up a great point too, that the prequels were about the politics of the day, and the original trilogy was about the politics of the time he wrote it. And yet, one of the biggest common arguments online that you and I see all the time, and I don't know if you argue it as often.
I used to. I stopped.
I had to. I get too much sometimes.
Yeah.
But there's this belief that there's no place for politics in Star Wars, which is so insane. And the very fact that, and I'd love your thoughts on this. To me, the people who don't like The Last Jedi are missing the point in that it works so well in a meta form that people don't realize that it's about your heroes disappointing you and the failure of the Jedi. And the biggest critique from the people who really have a visceral hatred for it is Luke Skywalker disappointed me and the Jedi would never fail. you've just became what the movie's about.
Yeah, I think that's I think with The Last Jedi, I mean, it's weird that we're still litigating a movie 3 years later.
I agree. Yes.
I don't understand the criticisms about the politics in Star Wars, because it's like, well, then you're not paying attention. Like, if you don't like the politics in the films, fine. But also, I don't really think, what are the politics of The Last Jedi, really? It's war bad, and the rich profit off war, and that's kind of the politics of it. And I think, or that, like, it's a little bit more muddy than a good versus evil. Like, things are not as clear cut, which I think is part of one of the best themes about it. So, I think, to your point, like, I think the thing that's most exciting about Last Jedi is that it is asking us what happens how do we keep on fighting when the heroes fail? And when people that we look up to fail. It's very similar to what happens in the original trilogy. Like, Obi-Wan failed, Yoda failed, everyone failed, and these heroes have to, like, stand up. I mean, there's a joke about Luke. It's like Luke in The Last Jedi is a Star Wars fan who saw the Star Wars prequels, and I was like, I can see that. I think I don't know. I think so. The Force Awakens, I think, is a really good film in that it has these characters growing up with this. It's very much our own experience. Like, we love Star Wars, and now we're, like, passing the torch. I think it's a really good passing of the torch legacy story. Like, here, like, the heroes have failed again because of the reasons, and if anyone says it's not possible, I ask you to look around and see we're almost 80-something years after World War II, and we're dealing with fascism again. Not just here, but across the world. So we're dealing with that. So the heroes can win, and they can still lose, and the next generation taking up the baton and fighting that battle. I think that's really, really powerful, and The Last Jedi kind of doubles down on that and says, all right, like, how do you keep fighting when the heroes themselves can't keep fighting? How do you deal with disappointment, and how do you find hope in hopeless situations? And to a lot of fans, I think it is hard to see their favorite hero broken. But for my taste, I think that makes for a better story. I just think there's so much more. So again, I loved the Legends. I think they're great. I think there's so many stupid stories, and there's so much fun. And part of the reason I love them is because they're so stupid sometimes, and things like why is this happening? It doesn't matter. It's great. Like, they just get weird for no reason. I always look at Crystal Stars like, yeah, that's really bad. Why is there a giant, like, whatever? It doesn't matter. Like, it's but I think the thing that I always look back on, and the thing that always, like, it affected me as a writer and affected me as a fan, the thing that really bummed me out every time I read a Legends novel was that, for the most part, everything got reset to zero at the end of every single novel. The end of every novel, at the end of every trilogy, up until about the New Jedi Order, or after a very long period of time, the heroes went back and they won. The biggest thing that we ever saw was that the heroes became more powerful. And I think the Legends novels and sort of the post-Return of the Jedi era created an idea that character growth equals increasing power levels. And that's not a character arc. That's a video game character. I think what's the sequel trilogy does, at least 2/3 of it, in my opinion, is they say, like, well, what happens to these characters? How do we have them fail and rebuild themselves? And that sometimes means, having them, breaking them down and building them back up. That's an arc. So
yeah, and I think that's there's that expectation, and I think maybe part of it is because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that Marvel Cinematic Universe has done, and I'm with you. I've always said that for whatever reason I like those movies, but I've never seen one in the theater more than once. Even my favorite ones, I'll see them in the theater. It was a popcorn experience, and I'm kind of done with it.
Yeah.
And I think but Marvel did a great job. I'm not a comic book expert, but I know enough to know that they pulled things out and they stuck to some of that. And I think there was an expectation that Disney was going to do that with Lucasfilm and Star Wars and say, oh yeah, remember when this character did this from, this book and that book, and bring that to life. And it just, not only was it not the way they wanted to tell their stories, but it also, let's face it, Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, they couldn't. It would be weird to see them that way, I think, as well.
It'd be one thing if the stories were told 10, 20, 10, 15 years after, instead of doing the prequels, they did the sequels. And I think they could have done larger stories, but it was 40 years since then. So they've aged. And I think they made the right choice in reflecting their characters aging. They sort of let them age in real time. I think what's interesting is, what I really love about the Force Awakens and The Last Jedi is that, what I love about Kylo Ren is what I really wanted Anakin to be.
Yeah.
And it's such a better version of Jason Solo. And I always, I remember having a friend who didn't really care for The Last Jedi, but he loved Rise of the Skywalker and he loves The Force Awakens. He didn't like Kylo Ren in Last Jedi because he thought he wasn't threatening, and I'm like, I think he's terrifying. Yeah. He's like, why? Because he's a school shooter. That's I think that's you see this young white male radicalized, and how is that not terrifying? We live with that every day. And that's fascinating. I think what's even better about The Last Jedi is that you actually get layers to it, and he really wanted just a bad guy who is bad, and that's not interesting to me.
And it's funny because people, I've been sort of coming to realize that one of the great things about the prequels and the ensuing Clone Wars series and stories, we've taken this quintessential bad guy. I mean, those of us who grew up with Darth Vader, I was 7 years old when I saw Star Wars, so I'm dating myself. He was just this awesome, cool bad guy, right? And even in Empire Strikes Back, he was still a really, really bad guy, and then that little twist at the end. But what we've gotten now is 40 years of the backstory of the villain, and that makes him so much more interesting. And to your point about Kylo in The Last Jedi is, to see a villain who gets he doesn't even know how to respond to his master, right? To see that level is really a very interesting story. And I think one of the things that I've thought about The Last Jedi is oftentimes Star Wars films have had a galactic implication. Every part of the story was galactic, whereas The Last Jedi was such a personal film. It was about Rey and her struggling with she finally has found a belonging, and he literally says, nope, you're on your own, and that hurts. You have Kylo who is desperately trying to find his place, and he's getting the same story. And to see, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it, because to me that was such a great and powerful story that Rian Johnson and the story group put out there. It's a very different at the 40-minute mark in this interview, I think it's a little late to go into Rise of Skywalker, but I will definitely love to have you back on, because I think that's where the trilogy failed to deliver on that piece. And feel free, we could definitely talk a little bit about it. I'd love to hear you.
I trying to also what I can actually talk about. So I think what's interesting is what I think in some of these things, I think what happened with The Rise of Skywalker is, I think everyone involved, I think because J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio tried to make the movie that they really wanted to make. I think at the end of the day, it is the movie they wanted to make within the constraints that they had, which is a limited amount of time because they need to hit a release date. Also, the loss of Carrie Fisher played a big role. And I think it shows to a certain degree, JJ's limitations as a creator. I think he is very, very, very good at restarting franchises. I love Mission Impossible 3. I love Star Trek 09. I love The Force Awakens. But I think when he's tasked to continue that narrative, he's really good at rebooting. He's really good at distilling down what works in a franchise and saying, this works, this works. How do I move it forward? How do I take those things, rejigger them, and start a new story there? But he's not really good at, like, okay, I've rejiggered it. How do I keep on moving that forward? And I think that's evidenced by Rise of Skywalker, because Rise of Skywalker, in a lot of ways, it moves certain things forward, like the Force Dyad. It moves that forward. I think that's one of my favorite parts of the film. There's a few other things that it moves forward from the end of The Last Jedi, but for the most part, it's a reboot, because I think he's falling back on his own. That's what his strengths are. Like, all right, like, how do I start something new? Like, and I think also I think what worked for The Force Awakens, which was, I like Star Wars, you like Star Wars, here are characters that like Star Wars also in the universe, let us have a Star Wars adventure. Let us reboot the series in a way that, continues the narrative. That worked really well. Rian Johnson had something to say in The Last Jedi. Mm-hmm. And I think JJ was like, hey, you like Star Wars, let's wrap Star Wars up. Because Star Wars, I think that's the biggest flaw. That's the biggest flaw, I think, is that JJ didn't know the story he was telling. I think it's also a big. Yeah. Not to get too deep, but I think basically the biggest difference you can point to in terms of JJ and Rian Johnson in terms of directors. Rian Johnson wrote a script that was approved before The Force Awakens came out. Mm-hmm. Before The Force Awakens had finished edit. He had a script, and he went and he shot that script, and they made revisions, as you do in any film. JJ, to his strengths and his weaknesses, is he wants to find the film and edit. He's very open about it. Yeah. There's some great stuff he talks about in the commentary for Star Trek 09, where there's like a shot of like a glass being, ice being thrown into a glass, and he's like, we shot that like in the Bad Robot Studios. We just set up some lights because we needed that one shot in that moment, and this is long after production had ended. He's very, and even in the Force Awakens commentary, he talks about like there's a lot of reverse shots that you won't notice until you look for it, that like were shot almost a year after the fact because they needed to they were figuring the story out. So I think that's the biggest problem with the Rise of Skywalker. He went in not knowing what the movie he wanted to tell, and hoping that he would find it and edit. And I think maybe if he had another 6 months, maybe another year, he could have found it. But that's
I totally agree. Yeah, I think I've said I'll pull you out of that one. I've said that I believe J.J. Abrams is a Star Wars movie fan, and Rian Johnson was a Star Wars story fan, right? Meaning, J.J. created Force Awakens. I don't know anybody who's a Star Wars fan that doesn't love that movie, because it like you said, it brought you right back. All of a sudden, you were a kid again, and you were seeing Star Wars. It didn't matter who you were. But yeah, and the other thing that I totally agree with you is give JJ 6 more months, and that movie's a completely different movie. And
totally.
And so, but yeah, I think, and I think the other thing is, to me, the reason I'm disappointed in it, and again, it's if it's not my favorite Star Wars movie, it's still a Star Wars movie, and I still love it and have fun with it and all that stuff. And it's just a damn shame that I have to say that, because I feel like people will hear that and say, he doesn't like Star Wars. And that's where we are as a fandom right now, I think, which is a bit of a weird thing.
Well, yeah, it's weird. Like, I hate that I can sit down and like, look, this is a film I didn't like, and it feels weird when I can sit there and be like, yeah, but I still think Attack of the Clones is kind of the worst one. Right. It's still Star Wars. I like the characters more in Rise of Skywalker, but it's weird that like I think and this is true not just of Star Wars fandom. I think it's true of literally everything right now. Everyone wants to boil things down as a binary A and B. You hate or you love it, right. And it is not. That is not life, and that is not subjective media. I love The Last Jedi. There are things I don't like about it.
Yep.
I think I could go on and talk about this. I don't like I don't like The Rise of Skywalker. There are things I love about it. Yep. I don't like Attack of the Clones. There are things I love about it. To be honest, like, I don't love The Mandalorian. There are things I love about it. It's not a binary thing.
Right.
If there's one thing that I try to, whenever I deal with anyone who is of the fandom menace or who just hates The Last Jedi for whatever reason, my biggest thing right now is more about, look, you do you. I'm going to like what I like.
Yep. And
what I like is not exactly an A and B. It is an A, B, C, D, and like maybe a G and an H and an I. I think that's what makes the great thing about franchises like Star Wars, like Doctor Who, like Star Trek, like really anything, is that these can continue on, and they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow. And there's always a way in, and there's a way in for anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. There's a way for you to like this thing. And while I can sit there and think people are crazy because they think The Rebels is the best show, I don't think it is, but I think it's great that they think it is. Right, I think it's fantastic that they love it, because if they love it, that means they're a Star Wars fan.
Right.
And then that's awesome. There's more ways to get in now, and the longer we go on, the more ways people can become fans, and like, that's great. Why do you want to gatekeep? Who gives a shit?
Yeah,
Excuse me.
No, I'm totally with you, and it's the amount of energy that goes into telling people they're wrong makes no sense to me at all. I mean, I guess I understand the passion, and I've said this before, and I like to think that it comes from a place of passion. They're just so that it just I wanted this and I didn't get that, so and it manifests in a way that comes out as obnoxious and rude, but the problem is there's such the dark side of it is so dark that it colors the way I see anybody who positions themselves in that way. So it makes it tough. It makes it tough.
I'm excited about new Star Wars, and I know that it makes other people who love the series excited, and it makes them happy. And why on earth would you ever want to take away someone's joy?
Totally. I think that's wise words. So let's move to the 10 questions segment of our show. I've done this I don't even know 86 times, and I'm always surprised. I love all the answers that I've gotten.
Sure.
So let's just kick it off. What is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
Probably Empire Strikes Back is my favorite movie. TV show, Clone Wars. Book, I want to say Canon is Bloodlines. I'm really excited for High Republic. Legends. I love the new Jedi Order, not because it was great, but I really loved it. But Thrawn, I think the Thrawn books are the height of the series, and yeah, I think that's also the first question.
That's fair. What's your least favorite TV show, movie, or book? I'm sorry.
Least favorite movie, probably Attack of the Clones, as we mentioned. TV show, I would say Resistance. I couldn't even get into that. Least favorite book. Is it? No, it's. Oh God, I know this one. I remember reading it for school. Not Crimson Dawn. It's the one with Callista. Hold on, I need to find this out. This is gonna bother me for the rest of the night. I'm doing a quick search. Pardon me. Please hold, caller. 1 second. It's Callista. I remember reading it and being like, "This is god awful." Let's see. It wasn't. All right. I'm looking through like all the books that she's in. All right. Oh man, this is gonna bother me forever. When was the Eye of Palpatine introduced? All right. This is Wikipedia. Anyway, it was. Oh no. Oh no. This is so. I'm so sorry. This is really gonna bug me. Because it's around the Dark Saber series, which I always find funny because everyone loves the Dark Saber, and all I can ever think about is
and nobody thinks about the Gary Anderson book.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite Dark Saber. Let's see, Dark Saber Legends. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Dark Saber novel. Okay, wait, here we go. Okay, and it was Planet of Twilight. That was my least favorite one. That one was terrible. It was so bad. It was just so bad. I'm sorry. That was so. I know we were supposed to be like wrapping up, but like that would bother me.
Oh no,
the rest of the night.
No worries at all. I was more concerned about your time than mine. Don't worry.
That was my least favorite novel. Least favorite movie was Attack of the Clones. Least favorite TV shows, Resistance. Least favorite comic is Star Wars Legacy. I'm trying so hard with that, but Cade Skywalker, I would not be sad if he died. I do not miss him.
Do you keep up with the that's the one place where I've had to kind of draw, like it's TV shows and movies for me. Then the books, I get most of them. Comics, I had to. That's where I'm kind of like, I'll read something somewhere.
I am behind on really everything. I admittedly took a little bit of a break in terms of reading all the stuff, all the novels. But like, I collect all the novels. I read them all. I was a little bit behind. I just finished Rise of Skywalker, the novelization. I think the next one I'm going to probably read is Queen's Peril. But I read them all. I really enjoy the novels. I love that. Instead of like the EU is everything's dialed to 11, everything's like dialed to 5, and it's like a really interesting narratives in that. Yeah. Instead of trying to like end the world, they're like, let's tell a meaningful story about this character. I'm like, that's really interesting. Right. But with the comics, I'm years behind. But I'm slowly reading them. Yeah.
I want to get there. I just haven't. All right.
There's so much.
Oh, it's again, great time to be alive in the Star Wars as a Star Wars fan. But whoa.
Yeah.
It's too much. I can't do it. Would you consider yourself an Imperial or a Rebel?
Rebel, goddamn! If I ever got a tattoo, I always joke about this. Like, I don't have any tattoos because I'm a chicken, and also, but if I were to ever get one, someone like put a gun to my head, like, what are you gonna Rebel Alliance symbol right here?
Yeah.
Ever since I was a kid, it'd be right there. I'm not gonna get one, but that's where it would be.
I'm the same way. Like, I'm like, one day I'm like, no, I'm 50 now. If that one day to get a tattoo, that's past. That's
you can still do it.
I could, but like you, I don't want to deal with the pain and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
Oh, the lightsaber sound. Oh, totally. And specifically, I did this when the Phantom Menace anniversary last year. I mentioned this in the Star Wars Explained video. The sound of lightsabers in the Phantom Menace is slightly different than the rest of the series, and I love that sound. They just sound thicker. They sound like I just love that sound. So yeah.
I think that's one of those things people lose track of, the fact that, not each lightsaber, but most of your hero lightsabers have their own personality in a way.
They do.
That's pretty wild. I mean,
it's pretty wild.
It became obvious with the Kylo Ren sound, but you're right. I mean, and now I'm going to have to go back and check out the prequels and listen for that sound a little bit differently. So, okay, who or what, I don't know if it's who or what, is your favorite droid?
R2.
Yeah,
I'm so vanilla when it comes to that.
Well, I mean, I've got more than enough R2s sitting in my office, and it's he's the guy, right? So, if you could own any spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe, which one would you choose?
It's a tie between the Falcon and the X-wing. I've always wanted an X-wing, but like it's also the Falcon, you know.
Yeah, the Lando Falcon or the Han Solo Falcon.
Han Solo Falcon. Like, that was the coolest thing about like Galaxy's Edge. It's like you're like, I love Falcon.
Yeah, I have to admit, like, I didn't fall down crying like I thought there was a chance I would, but when I did walk around that corner and you see the Millennium Falcon, I thought I was gonna. So I was lucky enough to go to the opening
celebration in LA, which was literally like a luck of the draw. My boss was just like, they were doing a thing while I was at Yahoo. They was coming up, and I'm like, look, if you can get me in, I'll fly my way out. I'll pay my way.
Yeah.
And then he's like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, well, the guy who was going to come can't make it. You're in. And I was like, I flew all the way over. And I thought I was going to cry seeing the Falcon for the first time. Yeah. I did break down when I built my lightsaber. Like when I bring it up, like when I built this bad boy, I started crying, specifically when the lightsabers, the kyber crystal came out. I actually warned my girlfriend before I left. I was like, look, I'm coming back with a lightsaber. Like, there's no way this is not happening. I'm coming back. She's like, okay, it's your money. I'm like, no. You don't understand. It's my lightsaber.
It may be my money, but it's my lightsaber.
Exactly.
It's so funny. So maybe this is it, but the next question is, what's your favorite collectible or toy that you have?
Oh, boy. That's actually multiple answer. My book collection is really important to me. I've kind of realized like my fandom comes into, I love stories and I love things that feel of the world. So I love my book collection. I love looking at it. I organize it in chronological order. I have to separate it by hardcover and paperback, but I love that series. I still have to get like a couple more books. I need to get some Young Jedi Knights books. I just miss those. But I love that book collection. My lightsaber, obviously, and my life-size Yoda. That is the weirdest goddamn thing I have. It's one of those things where I'm like, I can't believe I have that.
When I saw that in your TikTok video or whatever, was like, that's one of those things that I think if I saw, I would have to get one, because it's awful and it's wonderful all at the same time.
I'll tell you the story.
It's like prequel Yoda. Yeah.
It's prequel Yoda. Yeah, it's Phantom Menace Yoda. So the story is after the Phantom Menace came out, it was coming to VHS. Remember VHS? It was coming to Blockbuster, yes. And there was a raffle to win that life-size statue of Yoda, of adult Yoda, as we now call him. And my dad paid the guy off at Blockbuster so I could win it. And it's like, it just sits there now. It was like outside in our garage for a while. We eventually brought it in to keep it, because the base is a little rusted. But it's like, my dad he's a good guy. He was so
that's awesome.
He's a good guy, like, by paying someone off to so I can. But it's weird. It's just like this weird thing that I have. That I have no place else, so it just stays in my parents' house.
Sure, yeah. It's funny, like when my wife will come into this studio area here sometimes, and she's just like, I don't even know if I know you. That is a lot of weird Star Wars stuff to have. I mean, she knew it when she married me, but it's a thing. And there's something about this is something that's come to me recently, is that there's something about Star Wars collectibles that doesn't exist in any other franchise, and it's this desire to own a piece of it, whether it's a nice looking helmet or your crazy Yoda statue, but there's a desire to own a piece of it somehow, physically own something from it.
And I think that's like to the point of the lightsaber. I think that's because Star Wars is so outside of our reality. Mm-hmm. It is. The fact that you can pick something up and be like, this is from that world, it just connects you a bit more. It makes it somehow more tangible.
Yep, absolutely. So if you could be any character from the Star Wars universe, who would it be and why? I'm
gonna cheat on this. I'm gonna say my role-playing character that I'm doing right now. I'm playing a Star Wars West End game with a bunch of my friends, and I love that character. It's such a stupid story. It's great. I mean, that'd be like stupid. The real answer is Luke, but like I want to really play my character. So if I ever get a chance to write a novel, like I'm so making that character canon. That entire crew is canon in my mind. So yeah, that's a bit of a cheat. Some of the things, yes.
Well, my goal is to see both your name and my name in From a Certain Point of View, Return of the Jedi.
That is my goal.
That's the goal right there. Yeah. Okay, so the next question, number 9, is original trilogy, prequels or sequels. What's your favorite trilogy if you had to sit down and watch all 3 together? Which would you choose?
I'm gonna cheat. My favorite series, I think it's. I really think that. So my favorite order to watch the movies in, I think this is the way, is A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the A New Hope, Empire, Revenge, Return, Force Awakens, Last Jedi. I think that's a really great series. It's a 6-film series, and I think it's great. But I think original trilogy probably. But I don't want to stop there. Like I love Force Awakens, Last Jedi so much that like I wouldn't stop there. So it's like. It's hard for me to say it's hard for me to divide them into trilogies because I just love the continuation of that narrative.
Yeah, the way the world is built and I think that's at the risk of throwing us back a little bit. One of the things that I felt about The Last Jedi was that was actually a perfect ending to the story, right?
Yeah,
they were sort of it was, well, we're starting small again and we have another big enemy and we're gonna. All we can do is rely on hope. It was Leia and hope again. So, yeah. All right. So the last question is, what is your favorite Star Wars quote?
Oh boy. I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is "Due to not, there was no try."
Well, it goes with your statue. So
it goes with my statue.
Your statue goes: "Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate,
hate leads to suffering." I'm trying to think what is my favorite quote. That's weird because it's like there's so many. This is not. I don't know if this is not necessarily my favorite, but I love it when I get to use it. Mm-hmm. So. There was I live in Jersey City, New York region. I'm from New York, and there was a really bad storm one day. It was just like bad snowstorm, like a foot of snow, below freezing, and my girlfriend was had to go out for some reason. And I looked at her. I'm like, "Your Tauntaun won't make it past the first marker," and she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Nothing, just go." And then that's whenever there's a snowstorm, that comes out because I am a huge nerd.
Well, that's the great thing about Star Wars is now that there's so much. You can either have one that you want to put on your wall or a quote that you just comes out naturally at the strangest and at times that often make people like your girlfriend say, "What?" And and it was your moment.
it was my moment. She is so patient with me. I do not know how she handles me sometimes.
Oh man, well that's there's somebody for everybody, right?
Yep.
I don't know what that means, but that's what I'm going with.
There you go.
So, Adam, tell people where they can find you online and keep up with you in the conversation.
You can follow me on Twitter at Adam Lance Garcia. You can follow me on TikTok at Adam Lance Garcia. I'm also on Instagram at Adam Lance Garcia. I'm really boring with names. I just use mine. You can also watch some of my work on Wired, or go on YouTube, check out Wired or Vanity Fair. I produce videos for them. Or if you want to check out some of my novels, go into Amazon, just type in Adam Lance Garcia. You'll see a bunch of novels that I've written. The Green Lama is a series I've been doing about a Buddhist superhero from the 1940s. My dad collected him, and I'm the licensed author behind his novels. I'm working on the next novel. I promise it's going to be done eventually. We're also doing audio drama continuation of that. We have a full cast. I'm doing that with my own little private little production company called Radio Room. That should be coming out sometime next year. But if you just type in Adam Lance Garcia, you'll find me, or you'll find Adam Garcia from Coyote Ugly, who looks kind of like me but not. So.
That's funny. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Great conversation.
Pleasure.
And I hope to have you on again sometime.
Sure.
And thanks for hanging out. This was a lot of fun.
That was my pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me, man.